slow motion. She crept through the overgrown jasmine, a triumphant sneer on her face. Her hand clenched a vial of venom. She never saw the shadow move. She never heard the click of the lock. And she definitely never knew what was really waiting for her on the other side. The fence was a joke. 6 feet of splintered pine and peeling paint, an ancient, sagging monument to my lack of a homeowners association. But to Karen, my next-door neighbor, it was a wall of pure, unadulterated evil. It stood between her perfect emerald lawn and my wild, unapologetic Eden, the jungle I called a backyard. Karen believed in order. She believed in property lines, pristine hydrangeas, and the kind of suburban conformity that could suffocate a lesser man. I, on the other hand, believed in nature, in chaos, and in my dog, Tank. Tank was the main source of our war. A 7-year-old pit bull mix, he was a living contradiction, a muscular, brindle-coated brute with the soul of a timid rabbit. He'd lick you to death before he'd bite you, and his favorite activities included napping in sunbeams and chasing butterflies. But to Karen, he was a ticking time bomb, a menace to society, a vicious beast just waiting to pounce on one of the neighborhood's many small children. She had complained to me, to the mailman, to the police, even to a local news crew she'd tried to get interested in a dog-pocalypse story. Every week, a new passive-aggressive note would appear in my mailbox, each one more unhinged than the last, culminating in a laminated 2-page manifesto titled An Urgent Plea for Public Safety. The air was thick with the humid weight of a Florida afternoon. I sat on my back porch, the screen door a flimsy barrier between me and the buzzing symphony of cicadas. Tank was sprawled in the sun, a contented heap of dog, his head resting on a moss-covered rock. A low, rhythmic thump, thump, thump came from the direction of Karen's house. She was mowing her lawn. Again. The 5th time this week, by my count. It was more than a chore for her. It was a ritual of dominance, a way of proving her superiority. Suddenly, the rhythmic thumping stopped. I watched through the screen as the back of her perfectly coiffed head disappeared behind the fence. A faint rustling followed. My heart rate sped up, a familiar jolt of adrenaline. This wasn't the first time she'd tested the boundary. Last month, she'd snuck over and sprayed Roundup on my prize-winning petunias. My stomach tightened into a knot. I knew this was different. This wasn't about a plant. This was about Tank. I moved to the window, peering through the worn curtains. My breath hitched. She was there. Not in my yard, not yet, but at the very edge of the fence, her pale, manicured hand fumbling with something small and metallic. A pair of wire cutters. My mind went blank with rage. This was it. She was coming for him. She was going to try to set him loose so she could call the police and claim he was a wild, escaped monster. The thought sent a cold dread through me. I moved for the door. Then I stopped. A different kind of fear, colder and more calculated, washed over me. Rushing out would be exactly what she wanted. She'd play the victim, screaming that I was attacking her, that she was just tending to an overhanging vine. No, a confrontation. Now would just be another complaint in her long list of grievances. I needed to see what she was doing. I needed proof. So I did the only thing I could do. I stayed perfectly still, a silent predator in my own home, watching my prey approach. She slid through the gap in the fence, a triumphant look on her face. Her eyes, wide with a deranged glee, scanned my backyard. She was wearing a pair of pristine, white gloves, and clutched in her hand was a small Ziploc baggie. Inside, I could see what looked like a piece of raw meat. She tiptoed across the grass, her movements clumsy, theatrical. The smug look on her face told me everything. This wasn't about a trespassing dog. This was about framing him. She was going to plant the meat in the yard, laced with something that would make him sick or worse. And then she'd call the authorities and claim he was a wild, rabid animal that had attacked her. The rage was a fire in my veins now. I was a man of peace, a quiet gardener and dog lover. But this was a line I never thought anyone would cross. I gripped the door handle, my knuckles white. One step. I just needed to take one step and I could be out there catching her in the act. But something stopped me. A faint sound from the other side of the yard. A quiet, low thrumming. Karen stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes, which had been fixed on Tank's sleeping form, now darted to the strange cylindrical structure standing in the middle of the garden. It was a metal drum, perhaps 8 feet tall, covered in a network of pipes and hoses. Attached to it was a series of glass containers, filled with a thick, pulsating green liquid. She looked from the contraption to the Ziploc baggie in her hand, her expression twisting from smug confidence to confusion. Her brow furrowed. She took a step closer. The thrumming grew louder, and that's when Tank, sensing her presence, woke up. His head shot up, his ears perked. He wasn't a growling, snarling beast. He was alert. He trotted over to the strange metal drum and nudged a small valve with his nose, causing a puff of steam to release. He then turned his head, his gaze, settling not on Karen but on a small red bucket at the base of the structure. He looked from the bucket to the ground, and a small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his body. Karen, seeing this, a cruel smile returned to her face. She took another step toward the bucket, then a third, and then a fourth. She was almost on top of it now. Her hand, still holding the Ziploc baggie, reached out, hovering just above the ground. She was going to do it. She was going to plant the meat. But then she saw it. A small, almost invisible sign on the side of the drum, a stark white plaque, with black lettering. It wasn't a brand name. It was a warning. She squinted, leaning in closer, and her eyes went wide with dawning horror. Her hand, which had been so steady, began to tremble violently. She dropped the Ziploc baggie, her fingers spasming. The baggie fell, landing not on the grass, but in the small red bucket. The piece of raw meat slipped out, and as it hit the bottom, it dissolved into a puff of black smoke. The bucket was filled not with dirt, but with a highly corrosive, powerful bioconverter, the waste from the strange, humming machine. Karen stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth, a horrified sob catching in her throat. Her eyes darted from the dissolving meat to Tank, who was now calmly licking a stray leaf. And that's when my voice, low and calm, cut through the quiet of the afternoon. "You came here to contaminate my yard," I said, stepping out of the shadows. "But I didn't think you'd be foolish enough to bring your own evidence." She looked up at me, her eyes no longer filled with triumph, but with abject terror. She had snuck into my backyard for a moment of vengeful glory, only to discover not a simple jungle, but a complex, high-stakes science experiment. And in her foolish rage, she had just committed a major federal crime. Her gaze fell to the ground, where the now empty Ziploc baggie lay melting into a small smoking puddle. She had regretted it immediately. The smoking, melted puddle where the Ziploc baggie had been was an ugly, bubbling testament to her foolishness. Karen's face, a mask of suburban indignation just moments before, had crumpled into a horrified, slack-jawed expression, all the smug certainty draining from her like water from a sieve. Her eyes, frantic and darting, flickered between the small red bucket and my calm, unwavering stare. My hands were in my pockets, a casual stance that belied the fury still simmering beneath my skin. Tank, ever the innocent, had trotted over and was now sniffing at her pristine white sneakers with an enthusiastic wet nose. "Get away from me, you beast!" she shrieked, stumbling back from him. Her voice, usually so sharp and demanding, was a raw, panicked squeal. She tripped over, a loose garden hose landing with an undignified thump on the dewy grass. I didn't move. The beast is more polite than you are, Karen. He doesn't sneak onto private property with the intent to poison an innocent animal. She scrambled to her feet, her white gloves now stained with mud. I don't know what you're talking about. I was just checking on the fence. It was sagging. The lie was so transparent it was painful. She gestured wildly toward the flimsy pine, her trembling fingers a blur of motion. Wire cutters? I asked, my voice flat. And a Ziploc of raw meat? That's an odd choice for a fence inspection. She flinched. It was for a neighbor's cat. I was trying to be friendly. It wasn't poison. It was just a treat. The desperate fabrication tumbled out, a flimsy attempt to cover her tracks. My gaze fell to the bucket. A faint, acrid smell now hung in the air. That meat was a steak, Karen. A thick, ribeye steak. And in the time it took you to trip over a hose, it's completely gone. If that wasn't poison, then whatever you had on it was a catalyst for a bioconverter, which, as you know, is a federal crime to tamper with. A Class B felony to be exact. I believe the fine is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the prison sentence is significant. The last word landed like a hammer. Blow. The casual mention of a federal crime, the sudden, sharp shift from a petty backyard squabble to something far more serious, shattered her composure. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. What is that thing? She stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the cylindrical metal drum. Her voice was barely a whisper now, all the bluster gone. I let my gaze drift over the contraption, the gentle thrumming of its inner workings, a low, comforting hum. This is a biodigester. I've been working on it for a few months now. It takes organic waste, all my grass clippings, fallen leaves, kitchen scraps, and converts it into clean, usable methane gas. I'm almost off the power grid. It's a pretty remarkable piece of engineering if I do say so myself. A look of pure, unadulterated shock crossed her face, warring with a flicker of confusion. But that's not... You can't have that. It's a fire hazard, a security risk. It's illegal, she said, grasping desperately for any kind of law she could throw at me. I laughed, a short, dry sound that lacked any humor. It's been registered, inspected, and approved by both the city and the county. The only illegal thing happening... Here is a neighbor trespassing on my property, attempting to contaminate a protected apparatus with a biocatalyst she's not licensed to handle. Tell me, Karen, what were you planning to use to frame Tank with? Something untraceable, perhaps? A slow-acting toxin that would make him appear sick and unstable just before your next call to the local news station? She took another step, back, her back hitting the flimsy fence she had just cut a hole in. A splinter snagged her shirt, but she didn't notice. Her eyes had grown wide, a deer caught in the headlights. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. The man she had dismissed as a lazy eccentric was not only a serious scientist, but he had just caught her, red-handed, in a crime that could ruin her life. All because she had been so consumed by a petty, bitter hatred for my dog. I was just... This is a misunderstanding, she pleaded, her voice cracking. The bravado had completely evaporated. She was small, pathetic. A misunderstanding? I repeated, taking a slow step toward her. Karen, you have a documented history of harassment against me. The police have logs of your calls. I have a box full of your angry, passive-aggressive notes. I have a video of you spraying poison on my petunias last month, and now I have irrefutable proof of you trespassing on my property and attempting to contaminate a highly sensitive, federally monitored bioconverter. I paused, the silence stretching between us, heavy with the weight of her defeat. It's not a misunderstanding, Karen. It's a pattern of behavior. And this time, you messed with the wrong backyard. the last glimmer of defiance in her eyes faded. Her shoulders slumped. She looked like a child who had just been caught with her hand in the cookie jar, except the cookie jar was a federal crime and the punishment was a ruined life. "I just wanted to teach you a lesson," she whimpered, her gaze falling to the ground. The words were a pathetic admission of guilt. "And now," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, chilling whisper, "you're about to learn one of your own." She looked up at me again, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. The fear that comes when you've lost all leverage, all control. That's when my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, a serene smile spreading across my face. I held it up for her to see the glowing screen. A new email from the lab. I had been waiting on this. It confirmed the latest test results from the bioconverter. The results of the last material I had fed into it. An experimental substance that was highly unstable. A new compound I had hoped would increase the methane output by a significant margin. But there had been a slight hitch. My smile widened. I looked past her to the garden gate. The gate I had locked behind her the moment I saw her come through the fence. I had done it silently, a calculated move to trap her. I should have known, I said, my voice full of a strange, awful kind of admiration. I knew the compound wasn't stable. It needed a catalyst. I just didn't know what kind. But you brought it to me, didn't you, Karen? Her brows furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? She stammered. My eyes met. Hers, and the smile never left my face. The meat you had wasn't poisoned, was it? It was a slow-acting enzymatic solvent. You wanted to make Tank sick, not kill him, so you could show him off as a rabid menace without a quick death. You were trying to degrade his immune system, a biological agent, which is, you guessed it, an even more serious federal offense. She gasped, a sharp, panicked intake of breath. I don't. The bioconverter needed a biocatalyst to stabilize the new compound, something with a high concentration of specific, complex organic enzymes. Something like what you dropped into the bucket. My smile was now a genuine, terrifying grin. I looked from her face to the humming drum, then back again. The bioconverter just found a new, more efficient purpose, Karen. It found its perfect ingredient. A slow-acting, reactive bioagent. You didn't just try to frame my dog, you just accidentally created the very thing I was searching for. And you are standing in a closed ecosystem that is now, officially, a federal crime scene. She looked around, her eyes wide with terror. Not at me, but at the jungle she had despised for so long. The gate was locked, the sun was setting. The humming drum was growing louder, its thrumming taking on a new, more energetic rhythm. She had snuck in to poison my dog. But she had just become an unwitting accessory to a powerful and dangerous science experiment. She had walked into a trap of her own making, and the lock had just clicked shut behind her. The humming drum in the center of the yard began to whine, a high, metallic shriek that cut through the humid afternoon air. The green, viscous liquid within its glass containers began to pulse and churn, a sickly, incandescent glow rising from its depths. It was no longer a gentle thrum. It was a hungry, mechanical growl. Karen stared at it, then at me, her face a sickening shade of white. Her mouth was a silent, gaping hole. The perfect suburban facade she had cultivated for years had finally shattered, revealing the hysterical, small-minded woman beneath. You can't do this," she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy imitation of her usual, commanding tone. "This is insane. You're insane." She scrambled backward, her hands scraping against the rough pine of the fence. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape. The gate was locked. The small hole she had cut was now just a jagged, immovable frame, a grim reminder of her trespassing. She was trapped. I took a slow, deliberate step towards her, my casual, posture unwavering. "Am I?" I asked, my voice a low, theatrical murmur. Last week, you tried to get the city to fine me because my grass was a half-inch taller than yours. This week, you're here with a biological weapon, attempting to frame my dog, and you just contaminated my most sensitive piece of equipment. I'd say one of us is insane, and it's not the one with the approved permits. Her composure cracked completely. "I'll sue you," she screamed, her voice rising in pitch. "I'll call the police. I'll get a lawyer. You can't hold me here." I smiled, a slow, chilling curve of my lips. "Go ahead. They'll arrive to find a woman on my property who cut a hole in my fence and is standing in the middle of a federal crime scene she created herself. The evidence is melting at her feet. What do you think they'll do? They'll read you your rights and put you in the back of the car. And when the lab runs their tests and finds out what's in that bucket, you won't just be a trespasser, Karen. You'll be a terrorist." The word hung in the air, a final, definitive blow. The absurdity of it, the horrifying irony of it, all seemed to break something inside her. She slid down the fence, her head dropping into her hands as she began to sob, not with rage, but with a raw, pathetic grief for her own ruined life. Tank, sensing her distress, nudged her hand with his nose, whimpering softly. He was trying to comfort her. The bioconverter, however, showed no such sympathy. Its thrumming increased in intensity, becoming a rhythmic, guttural roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath our feet. A small brass valve on the side of the drum hissed, a puff of foul-smelling gray steam escaping from it. The green liquid inside churned and bubbled violently, its glow intensifying until it was a luminous, unnatural green. "What's happening?" she shrieked, looking up from her hands. Her terror was real now, palpable. I knelt down, a calm figure, in the midst of her chaos. I pulled out my phone again, pretending to check the readings. "The bioagent you used, it's a more powerful catalyst than I could have ever imagined," I said, a genuine note of scientific fascination in my voice. "It's accelerating the reaction 100-fold. That compound, it's becoming incredibly volatile. It's creating a massive pressure buildup inside the tank. We're in a very, very dangerous situation right now, Karen. You have to—" "Let me out!" she wailed, scrambling on her knees toward me, her desperation a frantic animal thing. "Please, I'll never bother you again. I won't say a word to anyone, I swear on my life." "Your life is already on the line," I countered, my eyes fixed on the humming machine. "I can't just let you out. If I open this gate, if I tamper with this crime scene in any way, I could be held responsible for what happens next." She stared at me, her eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. "What do you mean? What happens next? What are you talking about?" "The pressure," I said, gesturing to the drum. "It has to go somewhere. The structural integrity of the tank is failing. A full-scale explosion is highly unlikely. But a rupture, a controlled, localized vent, that's almost guaranteed. This system was designed for a slow, steady, methodical process, not a sudden, violent reaction like this." The whine from the drum grew to a piercing crescendo. A thin crack, no wider than a hair, spiderwebbed across the surface of one of the glass containers. She saw it, and a choked scream tore from her throat. "Help me!" she cried. "For the love of God, just let me out." I looked at her, my face devoid of emotion. "The only place this can vent is through the point of least resistance. It's an automatic safety protocol. The system will find the weakest point and release a burst of compressed methane, possibly carrying with it the remnants of the bioconverter's raw material. A highly corrosive cocktail. It would only last a second or two, but it would be very unpleasant." Her eyes darted around, looking for a way out. The fence was solid, the gate was locked, there was no escape. She was at my mercy, but even I was now powerless to stop the machine. "Wait," she whispered, her voice a desperate, terrified plea. The hole I cut." My gaze followed hers to the jagged, splintered section of the fence. A small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I didn't say a word. I just watched her, the silence between us punctuated by the growing, shrieking whine of the bioconverter. "Is that it?" she begged. "Is that the point of least resistance?" I shook my head slowly. "Not yet," I said, my voice barely audible above the noise. "But the pressure is building. The system is still calculating. It has to decide on a vector. You were so intent on getting through this fence, Karen. You made a wound in it. A weakness." I stared at the cut in the pine, then back at her. "It's a powerful irony, isn't it? The very thing you used to break in might now be the only thing that can save you." Her eyes were wide with terror. She watched as the crack in the glass container grew longer, a slow, methodical line of destruction. The whining of the bioconverter was now a full-throated scream. The fence trembled. The air filled with the scent of ozone and something rotten. A small, smoking bead of the green liquid dripped from the end of the crack, landing on the ground with a faint hiss. It ate a small hole in the grass. Karen watched it. Then she looked back at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, silent plea. I simply stood up, put my hands back in my pockets, and took a step back, leaving her to her fate. The pressure inside. The drum had reached a critical point. The fence began to groan under the stress. She had come to ruin me and my dog, but in her fury, she had created a monster. She had brought a corrosive agent into a volatile environment and was now, herself, trapped in the very explosive conclusion she had unwittingly created. The humming drum shrieked one last time, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The shriek from the bioconverter reached its crescendo. It was no longer a machine. It was a beast in agony. The glass container, the one with the spiderweb crack, gave way first with a sharp crack, followed by the sickening sound of more glass, shattering. A geyser of the luminous green liquid erupted, but not into the air. With a deafening hiss, the drum's automatic pressure vent protocol activated, redirecting the blast of superheated methane and corrosive bioagent directly towards the point of least resistance, the jagged, splintered hole Karen had cut in my fence. She saw it coming. Her eyes, wide with pure animal terror, fixed on the pressurized stream of gaseous liquid hurtling toward her. She threw her hands up in a futile gesture of self-defense. The force of the vent was immense. The fence splintered further, and the air filled with the stench of rot and ozone. The blast hit her full on. It wasn't an explosion in the traditional sense. There was no fireball, no concussive shockwave. Instead, it was a blinding, scalding, and impossibly dirty wash of foul-smelling liquid and gas. She screamed as it coated her face, her hair, her pristine white gloves, and her expensive designer clothes. The vent lasted for only a single violent second. Then, silence. The bioconverter returned to its low, gentle hum, the pressure relieved, its chaotic glow fading back to a dull, pulsing green. Karen, however, was no longer pristine. She was a dripping, wretched spectacle. The viscous green liquid clung to her hair in disgusting, slimy strands. It had stained her white clothes a splotchy, nauseating shade of chartreuse, and the smell was unspeakably foul, a concentrated perfume of rotting leaves, compost, and something indescribably rancid. She stood there, frozen, trembling, and utterly humiliated. The corrosive agent hadn't eaten through her skin, but it had eaten her facade. I took a final slow step forward, now standing over her, my shadow falling over her pathetic form. Tank, sensing the shift in the air, trotted over and nuzzled my leg, his tail giving a single soft wag. "I told you it would be unpleasant," I said, my voice low and quiet in the aftermath. "It's a powerful organic solvent. It'll come off eventually. The smell, well, that's another story." That's a concentrated mixture of every organic thing I've put in there for the last 4 months. Grass clippings, vegetable scraps, a few old fish heads. It's a bouquet you won't soon forget. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a fresh wave of tears. But this time they were tears of rage and mortification. She had been defeated, not by a physical fight, but by science, irony, and her own hubris. You did. This on purpose, she choked out, her voice raspy from her scream. Did I asked, a slight, mirthless smile on my face. I told you the system had an automatic safety protocol. It found the point of least resistance, the one you created yourself. The bioconverter saved itself by venting through the very hole you made to break in. You walked into this trap on your own. She scrambled to her feet, wiping futilely at her face with the back of her hand, only smearing the green liquid further. I'm calling the police. I'll tell them you assaulted me. I'll tell them you locked me in here. You're going to jail. I let out a short, incredulous laugh. Go ahead. I'll hand them the key to the gate as they walk you out. They'll arrive to find you, covered in my proprietary bio-waste, having just tampered with a federally permitted piece of equipment. They'll find a cut in my fence and the melted remains of a Ziploc baggie containing a known biological agent you weren't licensed to have. And when you try to tell them I assaulted you, I'll hand them something else. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was still on, its video recorder icon glowing red. It had been recording since the moment I saw her, fumbling with the wire cutters. I had been planning to use the footage to get a restraining order, to finally put an end to her harassment. But now it was so much more. The entire incident, Karen. The trespassing, the Ziploc bag, the confession, your pathetic attempt to frame my dog, and your beautiful, undignified reaction to the waste you helped create. It's all here. Every single moment of your self-destruction. I've been recording this entire conversation. It's a full confession, a videographic timeline of your every action. Her face went from a mottled green to a ghostly white. The reality of her situation, the sheer comprehensive defeat she was facing, washed over her in a single devastating wave. She hadn't just been outsmarted. She had been meticulously and perfectly caught. She had been so sure of her own cunning, her own righteousness, that she had walked blindly into the ultimate trap. I hadn't just gotten the evidence I needed. I had captured a cinematic masterpiece of karmic justice. She had snuck into my backyard, and she had just realized she would never, ever be able to sneak back out. She was trapped, a villain in her own story. But now, with a single, damning video, the entire world would get to see her fall.